All right, John Klar, we are excited to talk with you about your book and maybe like your upcoming sequel too, about Small Farm Republic, embracing local and rejecting climatism. I think it's a very, very important book, and the timing is unbelievable for us to be chatting after, after what's going on in the States, politically and everything. So, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It is an important subject.
Oh, it's like I really think your book. It's one of the most important books out there. It can be used as a reference book for governments, for all kinds of stuff. For like, ultimately, I didn't realize how important the solution is, but I feel like you've hit the nail on the head with the solution.
Well, I think that's very much in the public consciousness now as well. I've been feeling a little bit like that tree in the forest that nobody hears, when it falls. For years, some of us have been trying to warn people about our food supply, but it really seems like the worm is turning, and people are becoming more aware of the problems with processed foods. And some of that's just more science, learning more about particularly the gut microbiome, and learning more about some of these chemicals that turns out there are a lot more of them, and they're sticking around a lot longer, like forever, than we thought. So I think the convergence of a lot of different things are just raising public awareness. So I'm excited that people are starting to become aware and equipped so we can all improve our food supply.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that right off the bat. Actually, is how like you've been in this battle for quite a while now. You've been in it for a while. How long? Like how long has it been? And then why did you? Or maybe like how long has it been, and then what do you think like recently? I mean, just having Joel Salatin, for example, being mentioned, to be sort of working with the government on stuff. I mean, RFK's Maha, like it is, this must be an amazing time for you after you've been fighting this fight for so long.
Well, it is when I've been part of the team working to get Joel Salatin and Tom Massey and others in our USDA.
Wow.
And my book, the book that you've mentioned, was put into Bobby Kennedy's hands over a year ago, and I like to think it may have influenced him. Whether or not it did, he gets it, and that conservatives could fashion an environmental policy that was legitimate without sacrificing anything. In fact, that part of the idea for the book started with a conversation with Joel Salatin, when we lamented that all the people eating the healthy food were liberals and the conservatives were eating at Chick-fil-A. And how are we going to get them to understand the importance of their food supply? Well, it's a political issue too, and that's the point I try to make in the book. And in the process, I was really writing about farming, but in the process, I couldn't get away from the issue of renewables and the climate change, because they're so woven together in the attack on cows. And of course, the folly of it is that somehow by going after carbon dioxide, we can generate all these forever chemicals in solar panels and EV cars and have no environmental consequence of that. And that we're going to do that with cows too. So it's all very tightly woven. And the more I've studied it, the more I've seen why. And in answer to your question, I mean, I don't deserve any special accolades for having gotten sick. I was practicing law and I got sick with Lyme disease, and it really just destroyed me. So I decided to start farming and had to give up my career. And so I just sort of got thrown into it. So I can't really say that it was a voluntary choice, but I certainly do encourage more people to make it as a voluntary choice. And if I'd known then what I know now, I might have jumped sooner.
When was that?
That was in 1998.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was, and it was some years before we even figured out it was Lyme disease, and it was some years more of antibiotics in trying to treat it, and I still struggle with it. But food has become an integral part of my management and recovery as well. So the whole thing has been a journey I never anticipated, and so now it's actually interesting because that's how I then ended up getting drawn out of the woods when the state of Vermont tried to stop us from slaughtering animals on farm, which is the most humane way to do it and the safest way for human health, as far as not having the animals all pushed together into processing facilities. And the state came and said we couldn't do this anymore, and I was quite mystified. And so part of my journey was to learn how to raise food, but in the process of that, I necessarily learned about how it was that the foods I was raising were were better quality than what was in the store, that there were all kinds of regulations and financial incentives that made it very difficult for me to compete with what was in the store. And ultimately that the food in the store wasn't as healthy as what I was raising at home. And here comes the government to shut me down to make my food healthier. So we fought a battle here in Vermont to preserve our on-farm slaughter traditions, and we won, which is a rare battle to win in this country. And it's become a model, I think, for other states. And now Thomas Massey, I think you mentioned going to the USDA. Thomas Massey for some years now has been pressing the Prime Act, which in the United States would allow us at the state level to raise and process and sell more of our own local meats rather than just keep consolidating and consolidating. Maybe more than you wanted to know, Graham, but I hope that's
no.
To your question.
No. I mean, I want to know more actually, but we'll give Darren a chance to pipe in here.
We just got
Darren's
that back in Alberta.
You got what, Darren?
We just got it back in Alberta where they can kill on. They can like you could. It's pretty easy to even sell your own cows and stuff like that. Again, it was gone for a long time and it came back. I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago. So now you could like buy half a cow off your body and stuff like that. So what were the main triggers for your Lyme disease then? And what did that like present like for people? Because I think that's still one of those things that there's a lot of people running around with that might not know.
Well, and there's even division in the science. The Lyme specialist I treated with would probably say I still have chronic Lyme disease. And so there are different schools of thought there. It's a very difficult disease. It's very insidious because it's a spirochete. I was working my law practice at the time was in Connecticut, which is a bit further south. It's just south of Boston, I'm not assuming everyone knows. And Connecticut actually is where the town of Lyme is, where the disease was first identified in the 1970s. So I was very accustomed to ticks. I did a lot of backpacking and hiking, pulled them out of me. And so in my case, I don't really know where the tick or when it bit me. It was actually on my wedding night that I developed a bullseye rash, and I had a temp of about 104.7. I don't know if I've ever been so sick. And I knew right away because I'd seen it in my legal practice and around me. So I went and got doxycycline. But at that point, I'd already been sick for a number of months with something that came to be diagnosed as fibromyalgia syndrome, which I'd never even heard of. But so I think it manifested first in my muscles as muscle pain, severe muscle spasms in my neck and shoulders, and then in my lower body. And I actually hadn't even been to a doctor in over a decade. I was going to the gym. I was a backpacker. I was very, very healthy. And very suddenly, my muscles became my enemy. So then I had all the other symptoms. And then I went on antibiotics initially for the standard period, 30 days. And then after I got sick again, I went back on antibiotics for about 9 or 10 years. And frankly, I'm not sure how effective those were. And I've managed to manage my pain levels, my muscle pain particularly, more with diet, avoiding processed foods, no alcohol. I have to stay hydrated. I have to be physically active. I can't stand or sit for long periods, so I'll squirm a bit. But I'm much better now at 61 than I was pain levels at 34, 35, when it was just absolutely destroyed me. So the thing with Lyme is in answer to your question, Darren, it can, as you may know, it can manifest in a couple of dozen of different symptoms, migraines, headaches, muscle pain, fever, and the other. It can also cause psychological issues, fibrofog they call it, or you can really start losing your mind because it's a spirochete. It's like syphilis. It bores into your nervous system. It's very different from other bacterial infections. So I hope that gets some people to get triggered or get informed. It triggers them to get informed, not trigger them. A lot of times you just need to test and evaluate. If people have chronic disease, particularly if they're having a lot of muscle pain, it could be sleeplessness, it could be so many there. You could look at the list of ILADS, the National or International Lyme Disease Association has a list of symptoms too. And so it's not an expensive test, and the tests are more reliable now than they were 30 years ago. So get tested because it's something sometimes it just needs to be ruled out, and it can often explain a lot of different symptoms. And then sometimes that can be a good thing because it can respond quickly to treatment.
It seems like it's important to get treatment as soon as you can for it too. We have a friend of ours that's been struggling for many years because I think it took a long time to diagnose it. It seems like if you get it early, it's a little bit better from what I've heard.
Yeah, that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Is there things you can't eat then? Is there certain foods you avoid? Is there things that cause like flare-ups?
I think that the best I felt is when I'm on a keto diet. So if and this may be independent of the Lyme, but certainly with the fibromyalgia, it's an inflammatory condition. And if I avoid carbohydrates, which for me, the real weakness is potatoes and bread. I just like potatoes and bread. But the more I avoid carbohydrates, let alone processed foods like sugars, then the less pain I have. Imagine that. And so I think actually, and this might be advice for people, and also if they're suffering from fibromyalgia, it can be, more and more we're seeing that a lot of our food, our health problems are food related. And for instance, being on antibiotics for 9 or 10, actually overall about 12 years, how much was I killing my gut microbiome? And so I think part of what I learned was to question the medical community. They all look at you through a certain specialization. I tried a lot of different doctors, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't fix me. I had to close my law practice. I owned my own building. I'd spent a decade building it, and I lost it all. And that's, at least I got my health back. But the more I stopped looking for a pill, i.e., take tetracycline twice a day or doxycycline or clarithromycin. I was on hydroxychloroquine for years and looked for a pill to do it for me. When I finally got so sick of that and gave it up and started to try to manage my pain, and my life with my diet and my sleep and my activities and have better self-care, I actually found that I think I have a better overall outcome because I was looking for a pill to do something that, well, maybe I shouldn't take a pill and then eat donuts. Maybe I should stop eating donuts and I wouldn't need a pill. And I think a lot of our human health issues, we have more self-control. I'm using that nuance there than we realize. And I also learned very early when I got sick, I went to a support group and everybody there was just crippled. And I'm convinced that for fibromyalgia in particular, but for all of us, we need to be physically active. And that's one of the reasons I keep cows and sheep, because it kind of forced me to keep moving all the time. I end up like a Tin Man, in the Wizard of Oz, and I'm creaking. And so it became almost panicky for me early on to realize that the less I moved, the less I could move. And so I think that's true of all of us to a certain degree. So that's one of the reasons I plug farming is you don't have to destroy the climate driving to a gym membership and going on a plastic and rubber electrically powered treadmill. You can just chase your cow around.
And that was part of your decision to move to a farm, right? Like to start that up. Was that connected?
It was because I when I first got sick, I went in Connecticut. I went to a support group for fibromyalgia, and as I say, every person there was either in a wheelchair or walking with a walker. And it was actually horrifying for me. I was a young person. I was climbing Mount Washington in January on weekends. I was bench pressing 400 pounds. I went to the gym every morning at 5:30 in the morning. I was not, I was an active person. And this actually terrified me. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But also when I became aware of just how sick I was, I said to my wife, I said, I spent my whole life living where the money is. I want to live where my heart is. Let's go to Vermont. And we went and bought a farm, and I'd never made any hay, and I'd never run a tractor, and I learned from scratch. And so if I could do it sick, then other people can do it healthy. And, come on in, the water's fine is what I tell people. So it was a challenge, but so for me, it was a number of things, but I've loved Vermont. My family are from here, and but it's always been the sort of place where you don't go to make a living because there aren't a lot of job opportunities here. The salaries are lower, very high cost of living, but it's a great place to raise sheep and cows and hide in the woods. So,
and snow, lots of snow too, right?
Good insulation if it's heavy enough, but yeah.
What did Do you think so? It must have been interesting watching like the media over the last few years demonize hydrochloroquine when it's a drug that you had been obviously taking pretty regularly, it sounds like, to try and deal with your Lyme disease. What was that like? And had you already sort of walked away from the system, or what was it's because most people, they start talking about hydrochloroquine and nobody really knows what the fuck they're talking about. None of us have really had any experience with it, so I'm just wondering what that would have been like with someone that had actually had experience with using the drug.
Well, I'm smiling for those, if this is audio, for those who can't see me, I'm smiling as you asked that, because it's a quite insightful question, and I don't flatter, but you zoned right in on that. You honed in on that rightly. That for me was determinative. I was actually contemplating whether or not to get the vaccine. My great grandmother here in Vermont was killed by Spanish flu. And so that really did kind of impact our family. My grandmother grew up without her mother, on a dairy farm. It was not easy. And so, we've always been maybe more acutely aware of that threat of losing a loved one. And my son even said to me, he said, well, I would hate to lose you. He played the guilt thing on me. So I was thinking about it, but I've never got a flu shot. I'm a farmer. I believe in getting sick and having natural immunity. It just is part of what I've learned, and being exposed even to bacteria. But you hit right on it, Darren, because that's the thing. I was contemplating whether to get it, and then they said, no, hydroxychloroquine is bad, very bad, 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 bad. And I thought, that's insane. I took hydroxychloroquine for years. It's very mild. Every 2 years, I had my eyes checked because it could cause some eye trouble. Very routine treatment as an antiviral, administered in conjunction with antibiotics to treat Lyme disease on an intracellular level. It's a standard treatment. Hydroxychloroquine is a standard treatment. And so that for me was a huge alarm, just because, and not even because I was a lawyer, this is medicine, but I thought that response was absolutely illogical, inconsistent with everything that I had been taught and known for years treating for Lyme. And so the more I looked, for me, that was the jig was up, because when they did that, I knew they were lying about that. And now I know that apparently if they had admitted that hydroxychloroquine was an effective intervention, then they couldn't have justified issuing their vaccines under the PrEP Act or other, intervention, because it wouldn't have been authorized if you had another effective treatment. Well, that all of a sudden makes sense to me, because at the time I was like, why would you not give a known effective antiviral for a novel virus when you had nothing else to use as an intervention? Why would you not do that? Are you trying to kill people? And then you're telling people not to do it? Are you trying to kill people? No, you must be trying to sell a vaccine that, as it turns out, it isn't very safe and isn't very effective. But
yeah, very similar with ivermectin too. I mean, Monica in the chat there, Monica Lansing, is like, I've heard of ivermectin being used to treat lupus as well. And yeah, I think I've heard about that too. Many different treatments, and again, they were both demonized together.
They were. And in fact, we use ivermectin for sheep. And since I've learned so much about ivermectin through COVID, I'm using ivermectin more heavily now with the sheep, because we're organic. So we try not to use wormers if we can help it, but that's really one thing, especially with sheep, that you really kind of have to use. But after learning what I have about ivermectin with humans, I'm not worried about overdosing my sheep anymore. It's a pretty innocuous substance, certainly way better than a COVID vaccine, I think.
Was there any pressure to do jabs to your animals at all? Is that happening?
No.
In the farm world, because you hear about I mean, we shouldn't even really get into this too much, but we hear all the time about pigs and other cows getting jabbed with mRNA, and is that legit? What's going on with that?
Well, so thus far not. And of course, if the industrial world could find a way to patent and get taxpayers to pay for their patented substance that they administer to all the pigs in the country, or all the chickens in the country, or all the cows in the country. I mean, there's big money in that, even if it's ineffective, and they do it to humans. So why wouldn't they do it to livestock? But I went to a seminar with Dr. Robert Malone about the subject, and he said they really haven't developed it at a cost-effective level for chickens. For pigs, the attraction is you could literally test the swine in a herd and develop an individual vaccine for that herd of pigs. So, like many things, the siren sweetly sings how this could be used very effectively, but it's not being used widely yet. We've got fears of bird flu in swine, I think now in Canada as well. Be careful, you might get the sniffles or pink eye if you get bird flu. They've got everybody worked up about all these diseases, but meanwhile they are trying to microchip the cows. And in fact, I think just this month it goes into effect in the U.S. for interstate transfers, and that's what they did in Europe with the Irish cows in particular, and they microchip the cows, and then they can actually monitor where every sheep or cow is from satellite. They know where all your animals are, alive or dead, at all times. So whether or not they move to the mRNA vaccines, of course, they're very closely linked, because if you microchip the animals, then you can also regulate each individual piece, individual livestock, for whether they've had their shots, whether they're up to date, and whether they're going to come get you or not. So,
Darren, do you have anything to add, or any questions?
Well, I guess it's kind of encouraging that, because they'll probably get the cows before they get us with the tags and the sign. Hopefully that would be the hope. I mean, what happened? What's going? Because you are kind of connected to the agricultural world. Because I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they were really trying to ramp up bird flu. Was it a bird flu pandemic we were going to have? Is that what the cows were catching and it was all going on? What happened? Did that affect your farm life at all, or did it come into your state?
No, a couple of states, I think even Massachusetts was one, did impose some testing requirements, I believe, on state or interstate transfers of shipments of milk. It seems like it's still in the news. I found it actually a very interesting thing to watch, because I studied microbiology a bit, and I work with people and study people who are smarter than me, like Dr. Merrill Nass and some others who I learned from. And it didn't seem to me that this was a disease that was really A, very dangerous in humans, or B, that had really skipped over from cows to humans. So the whole story was like some kind of science fiction movie, horror that hadn't happened yet. And so there's been a lot of phobia around it. But also what I saw, which to me is very clear propaganda, is almost every single picture with the headline bird flu case had pictures of cows. So we're told to be afraid of bird flu, but here we are with cows. And why are we coming after cows? Why are we coming after cows? And, I think people know commonsensically and even laugh when they come after cows. And I think there are reasons that they're coming after cows. And whether or not it's deliberate, the bird flu does go along in synchronization with this idea that cows are flatulating us all into existential doom. And if we get rid of cows, then they control the entire food supply. I don't know if people are aware of that, but if you control the food, you control the people, is the famous Kissingerian quote. But they do control pretty much all the food now. Like 10 companies control like 80 or 90% of all the food in the world, and it's pretty much processed. But they actually already control indirectly all the pigs and the chickens, which, we like our pork and our chicken. I do, because you control the grain. Pigs and chickens are unigastric, and you can't raise them on grass alone. You can give them part forage at pasture raised, but you need 80-90% grains, I would think. Not to argue over, it depends on what kind of chickens.
Well, especially if you want them laying eggs all the time.
If you want them laying eggs, you need protein. And so, cows are an amazing thing. They take this thing called a renewable energy, solar panels. I call them grass blades. They grow out of the grass. They're regenerative. You don't have to ship them from China or store them in a landfill forever after 20 years. And they turn it into food. And these cows, this symbiotic relationship, it's interesting bedfellows when you have globalists and WEF and Bayer and Syngenta and the largest pharmaceutical companies all at the table telling us that we need to get rid of cows, right? And that, but these are the same people that are trying to make us dependent on their plant projects and their chemicals and their glyphosate and their synthetic fertilizers. See, if you get rid of the cows, then you actually control all of the food. So owning cows to me is a revolutionary act, because
Wow.
I don't need anything from industrial America to feed my cows. You know, I and my sheep. I can raise them 100% on grass. And as soon as you either patent the cow, because you're going to patent its new genetics, so it won't fart as much, right? So that's the same thing. Like they've patented corn and patented soy, and then they've patented the Roundup that the soy and the corn won't work without. I'm assuming your listeners know about what I'm talking about with
Yeah.
you know, modern cropping. So ultimately, if you control the cows, and you're going to make everybody synthetic burgers, right, and bug burgers, well, now you control all the food. You control all the food. And so actually, Darren, earlier you mentioned they haven't microchipped us yet. They'll get the cows first. Well, actually, they don't need to microchip the cows, because what they can do is they can just get you under an electronic currency. So we're headed into hyperinflation. I was just studying today, I think it's in India, vegetable prices, or it was India, is up 46%. This has happened the world over. Right now, Ukraine's being sold out for GMO crops, and its farmland is being sold up to oligarchs and investors. That's what was done in Iraq after the Iraq War. We got rid of the Abu Ghraib seed bank, and we took over their entire agricultural system to liberate them and industrialize them and make it more efficient and profitable. This has been an inexorable, maybe 80-year-long process of consolidating all food production into the industrial model. And so the cows are in the way.
That's fascinating. I really didn't realize the importance about that. Not only that, but there seems to be a lot of science recently talking about how healthy, beef is in all different ways, the healthy fats and the healthy meat. So I almost feel like it's one of the healthy, and that's another reason why they're doing it, is because it's so healthy too.
Well, I talk about this a lot. I actually get really excited about this. So, not all cows are the same. So for instance, when they malign cows, they're actually talking about their measurements are taken from factory raised cows, CAFOs,
Okay. Yeah.
which is a very different cow in its life and how it's treated than a cow that's raised regeneratively on pasture. One's raised with grain, there are others not. One is ambulatory, it walks around, spreads its manure on the ground. The other is kept in a facility where you actually have to use fossil fuels and tractors and equipment to move the manure around and spread the manure. I mean, they're totally different things. And so when they then talk about, we're gonna liberate these cows, and these cows are the problem, both of those are built on an industrial penitentiary for cows. And then you're going to malign all cows because of what happens when you unnaturally consolidate them in your penitentiaries. You see, that's a little bit twisted. What I was hitting on before as well is at the table with Bayer and Pfizer, you have animal rights activists, you have World Wildlife Funds. These are very interesting interests that are coming together to malign cows. My cows, my sheep, here you see some of my sheep in the background here. I feed the sheep. One of us, my wife and I, feed them 4 times a day right now, and they have water all the time. They have housing all the time. We shovel their manure. I am their tending slaves. They're not suffering. Okay. We trade off. And if I can't kill their lambs and eat them, then I can't afford the 12 grand I put up for hay this winter for my sheep. I am not doing it for their pets. When they talk about rescuing animals, the livestock industry, they're talking about killing them all, not allowing them, whether or not you send them to the slaughterhouse now, you're going to not give them a life. And if you ask those sheep behind me right there, I could show you other pictures. My animals love me. They love their lives. And my cows as well. The females, I'm very sexist. I kill the males and eat them. And the females I keep them for breeding. This is animal husbandry, okay, using that sexist term, whatever you want to call it. It's like a spousal relationship. So the whole idea of taking away cows is built on a number of different lies. One is about how livestock are treated. Another is that meat is somehow unhealthy. Well, there are two kinds of meats. There's grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat. And then there are processed meats like hot dogs and Vienna sausages and Spam. There are cold cuts. Oh, guess what? Cold cuts with all the sodium in it. Well, that's where meats give you cancer. Those are the meats they study to tell you meats are bad for you. You take my grass-fed meats, where I know the name of the hamburger, okay? Then absolutely the opposite. High carbohydrate diets, high sugar diets, diets with a lot of chemicals in them that kill the microbiome. We're learning more and more that that's bad for you. And if you replace my grass-fed meat with a plant-based meat substitute that's made from GMO crops like corn and soy that are monocultures, sprayed with glyphosate, sprayed with herbicides, sprayed with pesticides, even if it's plant-based, you're somehow having a healthier diet. My cows do not generate or require any of those chemicals, those man-made, being gender binary again, those man-made chemicals. There are thousands of them. Over 12,000 PFAs now have been identified. If you look at and by the way, the easiest thing people can do, both to get educated about what's happening and how to avoid it, is the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. If your listeners aren't familiar with that, the Environmental Working Group, EWG, it's a nonprofit. It literally annually releases a list of produce, so basically fruits and vegetables, and which ones have the highest level of contaminants on them. In the last 5 or 10 years, the amount of chemical residues, pesticide and herbicide and fungicide residues on things like grapes and strawberries and blueberries and spinach have gone through the roof. And if you really want to give your children 18 different pesticide residues, then buy grapes and tell me about how much better that a vegan diet is for you than a meat-based diet. And what I'm getting at here is, if people want to eat vegan, that's great. People have different reasons to do it. To tell me not to eat meat because you're saving the climate is a lie. To tell me because you're using industrial cows to dismiss my grass-fed cows. To tell me that my meat is less healthy than a plant-based diet just invites the question of, well, what kind of meat is it and what kind of plants is it? And by the way, we're omnivores, and there are a lot of studies out there that show that, straight veganism is probably not that healthy. But in the end, I'm not hurting the planet. I'm not making myself sick. I'm proof of it. At 61, I'm not on any meds, and I'm surrounded with all kinds of people that are obese and sickly. Obesity is the real pandemic, by the way, and the real comorbidity. Where's that coming from? Well, sedentary and processed foods, not my cows, and not chasing my cows around. So sorry for the rant, but they oversimplify a lot of these questions. So you invited it, Darren, again, when you just that binary dichotomy between meat bad, plants good. Well, it's a bunch of baloney, and the vegans themselves are waking up to it, because a lot of these plant-based substitutes for meat, they're processed. Just read the ingredients, and that's why they're getting turned off to it. They were trying to leave one toxic food product, and they realized it's just more toxic foods in shiny new bottles. It's not healthy. So these
I'm not convinced
are
that vegans are waking up to anything, but I'll take your word for that one. What other than telling us they're vegan, they really like that. What do you grass finish your cows too, or do you do any grain in your process at all?
No, we're grass from beginning to end. My cows actually don't even know what grain is. I try to give them a little once in a while, but our sheep, we give them a little grain just before we breed them to flush them. It increases the likelihood that they'll twin. And then when they come in and have lambs, it's kind of hard on them. So we we give them some grain when they're first lambing, organic grain. So it's funny though, you mentioned, I have to say, because I respect people can eat whatever they want for whatever reasons. To be vegan for animal rights purposes is kind of silly, because you're not really, to avoid industrial processed animals. Now, to me, that's meaningful, but to not eat animals at all is to put them out of a job. And actually, PETA, I like to share this story, and nobody believes me about this story, but People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, you can go look at their website. PETA has some pretty histrionic claims about cows and pigs and even bees. And one of their things is that people shouldn't eat honey because bees are so horribly treated in the bee farms, and that actually the queen bees are put on rape racks. They actually write this at PETA, and so you shouldn't eat honey. So
Some
you
real
should protect
hands
the
on your
bees.
tail shit.
And so you can't make this up, and then it's so terrible that cows are artificially inseminated, by the way. You have AI for cows. Well, I can tell you what, apparently AI for women is pretty cool, and you can buy designer sperm and don't even have to know the guy's name. But if you do it with a cow, it's bad. Well, guess what? When you let a 1,400-pound bull run around jumping on cows and their calves when they've just had a calf, they get injured. AI is arguably a lot easier on a cow. It's not a painful process. Likewise with swine rules, the gestation crates for cows or for swine keep the sows from rolling over on their piglets and killing them. So you pass a law to save the sow from being in a gestation crate. And even the National Association of Swine Veterinarians said, well, you're going to have more dead piglets. Why are non-farmers who are animal rights activists who don't know anything about what they're doing passing laws for those whose business it is to maximize profitability by maximizing the animal health? Now, that's not to say that there aren't some farming practices that maybe need to be regulated and that I wouldn't approve of, but that's how you need to know where your market is and make your choices, because people are. Because if you don't eat honey, then you're contributing to other sugar substitutes like sugar that may be using glyphosate as a desiccant. Most people don't know they use glyphosate not only to kill weeds when crops are first planted, but just before harvest, it's used particularly in potatoes, but also in sugarcane as a desiccant because it improves the yield. So just a few
And
days
after
before,
harvest and wheat.
but that's what I'm saying. So now that's going to kill the bees. And the number one source of studying sudden colony die-off is the honey industry. So don't buy their honey. Don't investigate in where the bees or honeybees are dying from and other pollinators. Boycott the bees and then buy other plant-based product substitutes that kill bees and kill the soil and kill your microbiome with chemicals. That's a brilliant PETA plan right there. PETA's a joke to me. So you want to get rid of the animals to somehow rescue the animals. You just are not rescuing the animals. You're not rescuing the planet. You're becoming more and more dependent on synthetic fertilizers and chemicals for your plant-based diet that's supposed to save the world and is killing it. It's not just killing us. It's killing and the microbes. It's killing the frogs and the birds and everything else. But but the corporations are making a killing and profits because we're becoming more and more dependent, and then we're sicker and sicker, and then they sell us more chemicals. They can sell you chemicals for when you're fat. They can give you a pill so you won't be as fat. And now all the studies are saying, kind of like with the bird flu stuff, with the pills now are, oh, well, you can take this obesity drug, and by the way, it also helps reduce depression and suicidal ideation. It's like, well, if you didn't weigh 600 pounds, you probably wouldn't have depression and suicidal ideation either. They're actually right now rant almost over. I just put an article out about this. The USDA is looking to revise their nutrition guidelines to focus less on preventing chronic disease and more on just helping people live longer. Because when we have these interventions, go ahead and eat what you want. We'll do a stomach surgery for you. It's not your fault if you're overweight. Enjoy it. I don't think this is good counsel for people's long-term health, and I don't think it makes them feel good about themselves. But I think more and more people are waking up that the same people. Well, look at Bayer, which is now the owner of Monsanto's patents. They're involved in the WEF for the farm plan. They're talking about sustainable agriculture. They're putting out all of these chemicals for glyphosate, for super weed killing, for other herbicides and fungicides. And oh, by the way, they're a pharmaceutical company. Bayer, they're a pharmaceutical company. The same company that's making the chemical, the chemicals that are tainting our food are making the chemicals that they use to treat us for cancer and other illness from getting sick from what's in our food. Is something wrong with that picture? I think people are waking up, and Bobby Kennedy has been very good. Oh, by the way, I wanted to add this. You guys, I was defending veganism, but I taught an agriculture class last year, at a Christian school, and my kids in 7th and 8th grade, they'd say, Mr. Klar, you swore. And I'd say, I did. You know, I'm a farmer. When we say that ship word that rhymes with ship, that we're allowed to, because we're farmers. All right. We can say, but I didn't say ship. Like, no, you said the other swear. You said the V word. To them, vegan is a swear word. You can't say vegan. That's a swear word, Mr. Klar. So when you said that, I was kind of reminded of that. Yes, they're kind of militant in their veganism at times.
I want to make sure we get a note about your book here, because your book has all those details in there, right? That's what I loved about it. It goes through like how cows aren't bad, how they're good, how they're attacking this and that. It gets into the, you know, the kind of the myth of the carbon dioxide stuff, the regenerative farming. I mean, I really like all this stuff you've been talking about. I think, you know, is really well covered. Lots of quotes, lots of science in your book. I mean, I just think it's such a good reference for anybody that's thinking about this, or politicians even, like.
Well, and that was, so, and the book's called Small Farm Republic. It's put out by Chelsea Green Publishing. It's also on Amazon. And I have a Substack where I republish a lot of my art, because I write about a lot of different things. And, but food's kind of my bailiwick. And my next book, which is, the working title is Farm Hard or Starve, takes a little bit further, because actually that's why I wrote the book, Graham. I wrote the book to equip people so they can make their own decisions. You know, we talked about Lyme disease, and one of the things I try to do is help people know how to ask the questions of their doctors and try things themselves to equip them to make decisions, because I don't know if they have Lyme disease or not. And I don't know if changing your diet will help you with certain symptoms in your life, but more and more we're seeing, particularly through the microbiome, that all kinds of illnesses, including Alzheimer's and maybe autism, irritable bowel syndrome, all kinds of diseases that are linked to the health of our food. And so I can just say this about why it's political, as I document in the book and do again in this book. We all agreed that chemicals were bad in America. We agreed that DDT was killing bald eagles, or that hydrofluorocarbons were bad for the ozone layer. So we were willing to stop using chemicals if you showed that they were endocrine disruptors, or that they caused cancer, or, you know, otherwise, you know, maybe they would make us anxious or depressed, as we're finding our food additives do. But then all of a sudden we had this inconvenient truth episode where everything shifted to carbon dioxide. And now, in pursuit of carbon dioxide, we're spewing out ecotoxins like never before in solar panels, and other things are developing that release these chemicals that we now do know stay persistently in the environment and in the human body. They call them forever chemicals, because they haven't been around, we haven't been around long enough to know how long they last. All right, some of them 5,000-10,000 years. We're talking about chemicals that have far more detriment to the ecosystem than cow farts. Okay, so even if carbon dioxide warming by human behavior was warming the planet, then this is throwing the baby out with the environmental bathwater as a response. Because we are also, by the way, generating fossil fuels. You know, everybody says, oh, look, the United States has brought down its carbon footprint. Well, why? Because we shifted it to China, because they've built 2 more coal plants a week for a year to meet the demand for silicon for our solar panels and for the aluminum for our EVs. Somehow, and the lithium production around the world is churning out mining effluent that's destroying the farmland in the Congo, and whole communities are being polluted with what? With toxins, with endocrine disrupting chemicals. Atrazine in corn is an endocrine disruptor. It mimics estrogen. Could that be causing some problems, especially in an already obese population? So, you know, that's why Kennedy's been a real interesting breath of fresh air when he said, make America healthy again. Well, that must be bipartisan. Who could ever object to that, you know? So I believe, in why my book is there, Small Farm Republic again, is that if people knew that, you know, more about what's actually happening in their food supply, because that's the big issue. As a culture, we've become detached from our food and farming. And I can speak about that with authority, because I was, you know, I've seen clouds from both sides now, you know, and I had no idea. I wasn't aware of and the more I learned about food, I was like, well, that's curious. my, that tastes better, and my, that makes more sense to make that locally, and boy, I feel better. And the more I've learned, the more it's like, wow, I could have had a V8, if you know that old. Now, yeah, I'm dating myself there. That's an old advertise. Wow, you mean all along I could have been healthier, and other people could be healthier, and it's right here in the soil at our feet. Yes, it's common sense. People know, gee, what's wrong with cows? Well, they're farting. Well, what about their manure? Can their manure be very good in the soil to rebuild soils that are being eroded when they're sprayed with synthetic fertilizers that, by the way, urea is made from natural gas, also known as methane?